getting us started. So yeah, I'd say go at 35.
Okay.
But we are live right now.
Okay, so we're going to start in about 2 minutes.
Yep. So thanks everybody for joining us. I was with you in the chat last time. I will be periodically showing up on video this time. Andrew Depew, Assistant Director of Education, but the star of our show is the fraternity's archivist, Brother Joe Wiest.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for being with us today. We're going to be live. I know some of you have listened in on some of the recorded calls, but this one will be live. So that's going to allow you to ask questions through the chat feature, but it also is a little scary because we may have some technical issues. So just bear with us. We're about 1 minute from starting the presentation.
There is some question on if sound is happening at the moment anyway, so I figure we'll fill in some stuff, but we just rolled over to 35, so I'll turn it over to you, Joe.
Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. I'm Joe Wiest, Rose-Hulman class of 1987, and I am one of your appointed general officers. I serve as the curator of archives. The fraternity has 3 appointed general officers who would help you in your role. There are more than 3 appointed general officers, but the 3 that helped put this presentation together kind of would be resources for you. Towner Blackstock, Davidson, 1994, is Phi Gamma Delta's historian. Justin Burns, Ohio State, 2007, is Phi Gamma Delta's ritualist. And myself as curator of archives. Now, some of you may not know what an appointed general officer is. We are officers of the fraternity, volunteers, who have specialized roles in the fraternity. And I'm going to kind of go through the 3 of our roles here. Towner Blackstock, the historian, he's just like you are as a chapter historian. He develops and maintains history-related documents for Phi Gamma Delta and for all of her chapters. If you have any chapter-related questions, history-related questions, or if you wanted help on producing like a chapter history, he would be a resource for you. And you can see his email address is there for you to reach out to him. Justin Burns is our ritualist. And again, like your position as ritualist for your chapter, he deals with all issues relating to the ritual and values of Phi Gamma Delta. And when a colony is ready to become chartered, he would be the point person that weekend to help get the colony to become a chapter. My position as curator of archives is more dealing with the physical historical items. So I work to collect, catalog, preserve, present physical and digital archives of Phi Gamma Delta. And I would work with chapters and colonies to develop and maintain both local archives that you might have, as well as the archives at the International Fraternity. I want to make sure you understand that we're resources for you, so that at any point, if you have questions or need any help with your job as a chapter historian, you can reach out to us. Just send us an email and we'll get back to you. As Andrew has already said, if you have questions on this live chat feature, just pose those questions and Andrew will interrupt me and we'll try to answer them real time. So you do not need to wait till the end of the presentation to ask any questions that you might have about what we're talking about at that point. Okay, so basically today what we're going to do is we're going to cover your job description in a little bit of detail, but we're going to talk about how your position is affected by COVID right now, and how there are some things that maybe you can't do as an historian, but maybe some things that maybe you'll have time to do because of other things that you can't do that might be good for your chapter. So we're gonna cover both of those things today. So your job description basically falls into 3 buckets of responsibilities. One is you protect the ritual, values, and traditions of Phi Gamma Delta. Locally at your chapter, you will document and preserve your chapter's story. And then you're going to take that story and you're going to share it both with your graduates and the fraternity at large. Again, because of COVID-19, obviously you're not having, or most of you probably are not having ritual meetings. You probably aren't having any meetings at all. You certainly probably are not having pledgings and other types of ritual ceremonies. So the challenge there is that because brothers are only in the chapter for 4 years, with this kind of, like I say, altered reality, you're going to have half your chapter potentially by the time this is over that has never sat through a ritual meeting or an initiation or a pledging ceremony. And so that has the ability to degrade your chapter's knowledge of our ceremonies, our traditions. And so it's your responsibility to try to use other ways to keep the chapter knowledgeable about the ritual, our values, our traditions. So we're going to talk about some ways that you can do that today. Excuse me. So in general, and then when we get back to the fall, you're going to, try to work to ensure the rituals perform completely in accordance with the laws, making sure officers' parts are memorized, that the services are performed as written without any kind of additions or omissions to the ceremonies. And you're going to make sure that your chapter officers are practicing for key ceremonies, such as initiations and pledgings. Again, this semester, that's probably not going to be happening, but that's going to be very critical in the fall when we get back to a new normal. There we go. Okay, so in addition to the ritual, we're concerned about our values, and those are things that we can talk about all the time. You can talk about those with brothers and pledges, new members. You are going to still be conducting a post-initiate education program. It may be done more one-on-one or through secure Zoom calls. So you want to make sure that that is done well, because that's the only touch that brothers are going to have with post-initiate education and our ritual. And I would recommend that when you come back in the fall, that you host a very thorough ritual review for the chapter so that everyone's brought back up to speed, especially newer members that maybe haven't seen these ceremonies performed. And something that you can be doing right now is keeping your chapter room and ritual equipment neat, orderly, in good repair. These are maybe times to even do that more so, since you've got some extra time on your hands. Your chapter story. So you want to build an awareness in your chapter of your chapter's history, the fraternity's history, traditions of Phi Gamma Delta. You've got pledge classes that you can meet with, again, whether it's in person or via Zoom, but you can make sure you talk about traditions of the fraternity, like how to wear your badge, how to wear a pledge pin, the use of like the term purgay, things that that you can talk about and can make sure are maintained. The things that make us special as a fraternity, the things that are Phi Gamma Delta, you know, just by itself, because you're not going to be going to pig dinners, but you can talk about the exiles toast with the pledges or the new members of the chapter. Utilize your chapter meetings when you're giving a report. Make sure that you take that time to you know, talk about some of these traditions and keep them in front of the chapter. You still are responsible for documenting your chapter's history. I know you're probably not doing as many activities this year, but you can still, you know, take a camera or your phone, take photographs at chapter events, collect any kind of articles mentioning a chapter, whether it be in the newspaper or campus newspaper, or print out things from websites where brothers are mentioned, or maybe brothers who have won awards. I know many of you don't do scrapbooks anymore. Maybe you do, but you know, you can do electronic scrapbooks and make sure that pictures are labeled. And then we're going to talk a little bit about chapter histories and how to submit those here in a few minutes. And again, we're going to come back to chapter histories, but you know, perhaps you can go back in time for the last year or two and try to get a couple chapter histories put together. Reach out to graduates. If you have graduates come around, although many graduate events are remote at this point, but as they come back around, sit down with graduates and talk to them. Record what they talk about. I mean, you can do it with your phone to create oral histories, or just record on paper some of the things that they talk about and get those put into chapter histories or documents or newsletters. You may have time at this point to go back and look at old scrapbooks that are around the chapter house, or make sure composites are stored correctly, repair anything that's in disrepair. If you have a chapter library that has documents or books, spend some time working on those. Again, these are things that you don't necessarily have time to do in a normal time, but maybe you can take some extra time now to either yourself or get volunteers from the chapter, because maybe you've got some people that don't have anything to do because the chapter's not doing as much right now, and reach out to them and see if they can help you form a committee. If you find old records or old documents that you would like us to preserve, you can send those in to us. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. And you can work on digitizing scrapbooks, pictures, documents that we can put online for you. Again, I'll talk about that more as we get into this presentation. Another thing that sometimes you don't realize falls under your job description is to submit items for the Phi Gamma Delta magazine that comes out a couple times a year, or the Friday Letter, which is an electronic newsletter that comes out every couple weeks. So you can send those into headquarters. They will put those in the appropriate letter, whether it be the Friday Letter or the Phi Gamma Delta magazine. In your newsletters that you're sending out to graduates, and I hope that you guys are sending out newsletters right now, even if they're electronic, to keep your graduates connected to the chapter at this time where they aren't coming back to homecoming or pig dinners. Make sure that you put some historical items in there, whether you've got old pictures that you can put in there to, again, connect them back to the chapter. And then utilize social media. These are all ways that you can reach out and touch your constituents, your graduates, that will help keep them connected at the chapter in these times where they might drift away and it might be hard to get them to come back in the future. Obviously, address changes, or if a graduate passes away, you can send that information to the international headquarters. Now, let's talk about chapter histories. I can tell you, as in my position as curator of archives, we've got 155 chapters thereabouts, and we only get 2 or 3 or 4 of these in a year. And it's really disappointing that more chapters, chapter historians don't take the time to put these together, because they are extremely important documents. And in the past, those were submitted in large numbers, and we have hundreds and hundreds of those digitized. Many of them are online, and they are great ways for somebody 20, 30, 40 years from now to look back at your chapter and see how your chapter was operating on that in that given year. So they are important, and I'm going to ask you all to commit to putting together a chapter history this year. Now, why is that important? Why is it important in general, or specifically this year? I will tell you that with COVID, people have reached out to us and asked how this time compares to the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And I know Towner and I both have gone through old chapter newsletters, the magazine, old chapter histories, and very, very little information exists about how chapters operated during that time period, how it affected chapter operations, which I find kind of interesting. We have the same thing about the Civil War. When we look through old minutes of chapters, it was barely mentioned. Yet it had to have had a profound impact on chapter operations. So what I'm asking for you is, let's get some chapter histories written and get those back to us, so that in the future, this crisis for our fraternity is well documented, not just at the international fraternity level, but at chapter levels, so we know how specific chapters were able to react to this situation and continue to be successful. Now, I think part of the reason that we get so few chapter histories is because chapter historians think that they've got to write this novel 20-page narrative history of the chapter. And yes, in the past, many chapters, that is what they did turn in. And they're interesting to read. They do give a lot of insight into what happened at the chapter level. But I think there's maybe an easier way, and I'm going to cover that with you here over the next few minutes, that I think makes this manageable, and in such a way that maybe you can even go back a couple years while you were in the chapter, or maybe some of the seniors that were in the chapter can help you. And maybe you can not only knock out this year's, maybe the last couple years. Again, if this is the one extra thing that you do this year, I hope that this can be the thing that you accomplish. So here's what I'm going to suggest. First of all, chapter histories should cover the academic year, not the calendar year. Now, I know that many times you're elected kind of to coincide with the calendar year, so you're going to have to probably work with the prior historian or other brothers in the chapter to pick up things from earlier in the year to make sure that we're covering a school year, not a calendar year. So here are some of the things that I think if you gather together, you can put together one of these histories in really probably a weekend of work, just a few hours of work. Get with your recording secretary and ask him to give you electronic copies or print out copies of all the chapter minutes from the period of time that you're working with. If you've done any chapter newsletters, those are great resources that tells that what you've done at the chapter level. Have those in front of you. Get a list of cabinet officers and committee chairmen from the beginning of the school year, and the new cabinet committee chairman after elections. So generally this time period, have both of those lists with you. By now, most of you have already pledged your fall pledge class. You know who those members are. So you want to have a list of the new members. I would suggest, if you can, get the names of the big brothers for each of the new members. And then a list of chapter members, which again, your recording secretary should have that, or you should be able to easily come up with that. Now, if you're going back in time and working on one from last year or the year before, you can get those names just by looking at composites. So have somebody sit down with a composite and just type up all the names of the brothers who were in the chapter 2 years ago or 3 years ago, if you're going back in time and trying to capture chapter histories from the past. So using the chapter minutes and newsletters, you should be able to capture pretty much every event that your chapter's done, whether that be a chapter meeting on a Sunday night or a Monday night, or a service event, pig dinner, homecoming, football tailgates. All those things are probably mentioned in those documents. Perhaps you have an online chapter calendar that might list those. But what we're trying to do at this point is to create a list of all the events that your chapter's done and put them in chronological order. So, you know, homecoming was October 2nd, 2020. So you're going to just put that and start there. That's the first part. So let's get a list together of all the events, things that the chapter did. And then once you've got that done, then go through the ones that you can comment about and just add a 1 or 2 sentence narrative. You know, homecoming, everybody had a great time. The football team won by 20 points or whatever. Just flesh out the event a little bit with just a little bit of narrative. You don't have to write a lot of paragraphs or do a lot of extra stuff with that, just enough to give somebody 20 or 30 years in the future, just a flavor of what each of those events were. And at the end of all those items, when we get to May or April, whenever school's out for you, if you can, just write a 1 or 2 paragraph narrative, not pages, to talk a little bit about what the chapter, you know, what the experience was like in the chapter for that year. What were your challenges? What were your successes? What were the chapter's strengths? So again, somebody reading this in the future will have some sense of what the chapter struggled with. Again, not to harp on COVID, but people are going to be interested in that and to see how that challenged your chapter. So once you get that part done, here's some things I would add is just at the end as an appendix or appendix items to your chapter history. Again, the list of cabinet and committee chairmen at the beginning of the academic year, a list of cabinet and committee chairmen at the end of the academic year, a list of new members with when they pledged and initiated, a list of big brothers if you can. And then a complete list of chapter members at the end of the academic year. And then at the very end, I would print out all the chapter minutes from the year in chronological order and just attach those to the document. If you put all that together into one document, you've created a pretty substantial history for your chapter, and somebody in the future is going to be able to look at that and really know what your chapter was all about. You can send a hard copy of that, just put that all together and put it in a box and UPS it to headquarters, and they'll put it on a shelf for me. So when next time I'm down in Lexington, I will take that, I will stabilize it, preserve it in the correct archival folders or boxes or whatever, and it will be stored with your chapter items for somebody 50 years, 100 years theoretically, to be able to go in and see that. And then if you have the ability, and most of you probably have printers in your chapter houses or on campus that will scan, if you can then scan all those items and send that to me, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit, I will keep that stored with your chapter records so that that's kept electronically. Now, we do not ever post minutes. Chapter minutes are never posted online, but the chapter histories and some of those appendix items could be put online to share with your graduates. Again, part of sharing your chapter story. But don't worry about anything that's in the chapter minutes, especially if it's something that you maybe wouldn't want to have seen publicly. And certainly chapter minutes are considered esoteric, and we would never post those. So that's it for chapter histories. Let's stop here for a second and see if there are any questions that anyone has about chapter histories and how to approach that, and hopefully that we'll get 150 of those turned in this year. Any questions? Okay, I take it that there are no questions about that, so we'll move on. And if you do think of some questions later, we can answer those a little bit later. Let's talk about Phi Gamma Delta's archives. Now, I doubt that probably any of you, because of the fact that our headquarters has been locked down for the last almost year from having visitors, but almost none of you have probably ever been to visit our headquarters in Lexington, Kentucky. And one of the things that surprises people when they go to Lexington and go down into the basement and go into the archives vault or the archives rooms, we've got 3 areas down there with archives in them. They have no idea that we have such an extensive collection of items for the international fraternity, as well as all of our current and past chapters. I would estimate that we have at least 250,000 photographs in our collection, which includes any picture that's ever appeared in the Phi Gamma Delta magazine, as well as chapter pictures that have been submitted, pictures that have been taken at events like ecclesia, conventions, Fiji Academies when they're in person. So we have a tremendous collection of photographs. We have hundreds and hundreds of archival boxes sorted by chapter. So if you go there, there's actually a vault that was designed to protect those documents in case of a catastrophe with the main building. And if you go in there, you're going to find boxes for your chapter, other chapters. You can pull out the box, for instance, for Washington Jefferson College, and go in there and you'll see the very first minutes from April 22nd, 1848, and May 1st, 1848, all the way to maybe your chapter sent a newsletter out 6 months ago, and it's going to be sorted into one of those boxes potentially. So it is hard to imagine how many actual documents there are there, but I mean, just literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, books, newsletters, minutes, all stored there and preserved so that they would be available to look at many, many years in the future. Some of those items are 150, 160 years old themselves. Now, for the last 11 years, a group of us, and usually 20 to 30 graduates and undergraduates, gather in March, and we spend a week in Lexington, an event called Archives Weekend. Now, this year we will not have it because of COVID, but we gather, we pull out those items, we scan, digitize pictures, documents, and then we put them into the correct archival picture folders or folders that are acid free, so that they're well protected. and they're sorted by chapter or by event, by category, so that we can easily get to them. And in the last 11 years, we have, I looked this up last night, we have digitized 271,000 items. We have nearly 4 terabytes of data. And we have just scratched the surface. But we have right now about 80,000 items online for you to look at in our digital repository. And we're going to explore that here in just a minute. But a lot of people are surprised that we have that much stuff online, and especially when they start to go in and take a look at it. And you might be surprised, hopefully you will be, to know what your own chapter has online that you might be able to utilize as your chapter historian. So we have a website for our digital repository. It's figamarchives.org. And as of right now, and things are going online all the time, we have 1,300 chapter composites. So you might be able to go in and see chapter composites for your chapter from last year, or maybe the 1890s, depending on how old your chapter is. We have about 13,000 pictures are online. 2,200 newsletters, including some that date back into the 1890s. Those newsletters are able to be clicked on, and you can go through and read them. The pages will actually turn. All past Phi Gamma Delta magazines from 1879 through the very last edition in 2020, which is over 700 editions. That's 70,000 searchable pages of magazines which chronicle Phi Gamma Delta's history from 1879 forward, and chronicle your own chapter's history, because since the very beginning edition, every edition includes information about all of our chapters. So if you wanted to see what your chapter was doing in 1910, assuming your chapter existed then, you can go into that magazine and look up the little letter that your chapter historian back in 1910 wrote and submitted to the magazine. So you can see what your chapter was doing back then. We have over 100 collections of past conventions, ecclesia, and academies. Now those collections are being built out currently. So some of those folders are empty, and some of them might have 200 or 300 pictures in them, or documents, or programs from an ecclesia or a Fiji Academy. Those are kind of interesting to look through. Our oldest convention that we have items for dates back to 1852. And I think the most exciting thing for you as a chapter historian and for your chapter is we have, over the last 2 years, built out 221 curated chapter collections, which means we created a folder or collection for each of your chapters, both current chapters and all past chapters. And then I went through all 80,000 items, literally. We did it through some use of technology, but tagged your chapter back to those collections. So if there is an ecclesia picture from 1962 and there's a person from your chapter in that picture, it's tagged back to your collection. And when you look at that, you're going to be able to see that picture is not only in the 1962 ecclesia collection, but it would be in your chapter collection as well. So let's take a moment and just look at this site. I'm going to click on it. Again, this is visible to anyone that wants to go to this site. This is the front page of it. I assume you can see that. And these are broad categories of collections. We have artifacts, audio and video, books, documents, and letters, chapter related, event related, conventions, ecclesia, and academies, founders and other members. That's an interesting collection. There's stuff from the 6 founders in there. Just generic images, miscellaneous collections, chapter newsletters, and Phi Gamma Delta magazines. Now, and then this under review, we'll talk about that in a little bit. If you want to help us, that's a section where things are being worked on before they're put over into these other completed collections. So let's click on this newsletter collection. So you can see here the newsletters dating all the way back to 1898, this Union College newsletter. If I click on that, we can see a scan of the newsletter. And if I click that, you can go through and actually turn the pages. And keep in mind that any name or anything that appears in these newsletters is searchable. So if I go up to this search tab up here and type in a search term, and it appears in this specific newsletter or a photograph or the Phi Gamma Delta magazine, those will return in the search box. So if you want to see, I've had people look for their grandfather. They'll come up to me and say, my grandfather was a Fiji at such and such a school. Is there anything in your collection? And within 2 minutes, we can find if his name was mentioned in any documents. So that's like I said, that's newsletters. If you want to go to founders, these are all things that are related to the 6 founders. Here's the minutes. And I said we never post minutes, but these are a couple exceptions. There's some excerpts of some of the minutes with things blotted out that would be esoteric. We have all the known pictures of the founders. We have their grave sites. Here's something interesting. Ellis Bailey Gregg. There's his business card. He's an attorney. We've got that at headquarters, and there's a scan of it. Chapters. So we've got 3 things here. We have pictures of chapter houses. And this might be, if you're an old chapter and you may have had 3 chapter houses, 4 chapter houses over time, you can go back and potentially see pictures of all those chapter houses. So you can see, I try to put the year, if I know what year the chapter house is. You can kind of go through those. So they're kind of sorted by chapter. If you want just some generic information about your chapter, you can go into this section and just click on one of the chapters. There's Auburn. And there'll be a little bit of information there. And then some chapters, more than just a little bit of information about when you were chartered, where your chapter is located, or if you're trying to find information about another chapter, that information would be in this section. And then individual chapter collections. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but each of your chapters has one of these collections here. And I'm going to show you an easy way to get to those here in just a minute. So some of the interesting things also on these video and audio files, we have all the way back to the 1948 Ecclesia video files. Some of these are pretty interesting. Some of them we didn't really even know we had some of these things, but there was a cassette or a videotape that wasn't labeled at headquarters, and we sent it away to be digitized. And lo and behold, it's an interview from 1980 with Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, which we didn't even know we had. So it's fun to find some of those things. In the audio collection, for instance, we found a dictaphone tape or belt, I guess is the correct term, which most of you don't even know what that is, but it's a piece of waxed tubing that you would speak in, and it would record onto that wax. And we were able to digitize it and found it was a conversation with Gene Cernan, who turned out to be the last man to walk on the moon. It was during the Apollo 13 crisis, and it was a call during that crisis between Bill Zerman, the executive director of the fraternity, and Gene Cernan talking about what was going on. So again, it was just an interesting find. We had no idea that we had something that significant, that you can listen to that phone call. These are, you see here, these are audio files of all of our songs, including some song competitions that were popular in fraternities back in the 40s and 50s. So again, you can explore through these and download these audio files if you're interested. So that's just a touch on what we have online. Let me touch on one other thing I think is interesting. If you go into the magazines, this collection here, again, I said we had over 700 magazines online all the way back to 1879, our first edition. So if you just click on that, there's a digital copy of our first magazine. And if you click through it, right here, you're going to see these little blurbs. There's the Pi chapter, our Allegheny chapter, but these are all little Theta Deuteron and Ohio Wesleyan, little history tidbits of those chapters. So from the very first edition of the magazine on, those are in there, and it's really interesting to spend some time with those, especially if your chapter is an older chapter. You can go back and see many, many years ago what was going on at your chapter. So let's go back. So that's phigamarchives.org. You can spend hours on there, but it is a good way to find things that you might be able to share with your chapter in Zoom calls if you're trying to just make things a little bit more interesting. Now, I talked about the chapter archives, and you can go in and search for them. It's a little hard because if your chapter is Lambda New and you type in Lambda New and there's a new Lambda chapter, you're going to get some of their stuff. And so we tried to figure out a way to make this a little bit easier for you, a way that you could post things on websites or in social media to share out with your chapters. So we built out over the last several months it's not really a website, these are just short links to those collections. So using pgdarchives.org. Now, if you type in pgdarchives.org as just a URL, it's not going to go anywhere. What this is meant to be is just an easy way for anyone to kind of just memorize this so that you could go and look at a chapter's archives. So pgdarchives.org/your chapter's Greek name. That could be, as you see here, Lambda New with the capital L, capital N, or it can be without the capital letters. Both will resolve to that chapter collection. So if I click on this, I'm straight to the page for the Nebraska chapter's archives. So you can see, their archives are here. As you flip through these pages, you're only going to see Nebraska stuff, University of Nebraska stuff. If you're wanting to share out to, again, social media, websites, put a link in a chapter newsletter and say, hey, look, we've got all this stuff online. If you're interested in going through and looking at old newsletters, if you're interested in going through, here's a newsletter back before the Greek letters were not forbidden to be used. And again, you can go in there and take a look at these newsletters and different things from that chapter. So I encourage you to take a look and see what your chapter has. Some of you, like Nebraska, they have over 1,000 items online. Some of you might only have 3 items online, which I would encourage you maybe to send us some more items so that we can get those online for you. But again, this is something we're excited to introduce because it's a real easy way for you to get straight to your chapter holdings online. Now, there's some other resources that we have. So again, we've already covered the digital repository, But if you're interested in things that Towner works on, the chapter fraternity history, chapter history stuff, if you go to the fraternities website, phigam.org/history, you're going to find interesting things here that are not necessarily digitized artifacts like I have on the digital repository. But let's say you wanted to know who with a list of past Archon presidents, or for instance, like here's a list of chapter charterings, when chapters are chartered in chronological order. These kinds of things are online in this section. I said Archon presidents. Here's a list of all the Archon presidents all the way back to Samuel Beatty Wilson, 1848. He technically wasn't an Archon president, but he was president of the fraternity, all the way through the current list of presidents. There's our current Archon president there, Nick. So anyway, so these might be some things that might be interesting for you, especially if you're wanting to dig a little deeper, I think, into fraternity history. But I want to make sure that you knew some of these things were online. This list of articles is really interesting, especially if one of these articles is about your chapter, because Towner has gone into great detail on some of these things. Bigger fraternity like Beta Theta Pi, some of the fraternities, or excuse me, schools that like Miami or Jefferson College, where multiple fraternities might have started. You maybe know about the Sweetwater incident. There's an article about that. Some of you may know about the 13th Fiji, the story about that. But if you want more information, there's a lot of interesting information here in these articles. Again, these are not things we would put on the digital repository because they're not really artifacts, but these are fascinating historical documents that are all available online for you. If you want to dig a little bit deeper, or if you have chapter brothers that are more interested in the fraternity's history, those things are, again, all online. We have 3 social media accounts that are pretty active. Our Twitter account, Phigam Archives. We have a Facebook page, and we have an Instagram page, Phigam Archives as well. We do post regularly to these pages, so that if you're interested in what happened today in Phi Gamma Delta, or if you want to pose a question on our Facebook page and have one of us try to answer it, or if you have some interesting things that you want to post pictures online, or again, mainly Facebook, but I would encourage you to not only yourself sign up for these social media accounts, but if you have brothers in the chapter that are especially interested in fraternity history, they may be interested in following these accounts. Again, another resource, as I mentioned before, Towner as historian, Justin as a ritualist, and myself as curator of archives. Do not hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have questions or want to do some special projects at your chapter. Okay, now let's dig a little deeper, but before I do that, let's just pause here for a second and see if there's any questions. Andrew, do you have anybody that's posed any questions in the chat?
Yeah, we've got a question from Richard. He is wondering what the best things to send to the archives are. He notices that his chapter is missing quite a lot, but he can probably find a fair amount of it. So he would just like to know what kind of stuff the archives are looking for.
Okay, so you said Richard, and
Yep.
What chapter is he from?
That's a very good question. Richard Wells.
It doesn't matter too much.
Newtown,
Newtown. Help me with that one.
North Texas.
North Tech. Okay, so a fairly new chapter, correct? I believe. So So the thing I always tell chapters that are fairly new, and when I say fairly new, I mean you're not 50 years old or 100 years old, and you may think that the things that your chapter has are not that historic, but I would challenge that and say they're very historic, because those things are some of those things might be your founding documents. They may be the very first picture of a cabinet or your first pledge class. And those may be sitting on a phone somewhere and might get lost over time. So yeah, those things are all important to upload. So what I'm going to ask for you is if we can wait just 1 second, I'm going to cover that here in a second about what things that we can send and how it's easy to send those. So a great question. Let's come back to that in a minute as I get to that section. And then if we have more questions about that, then we'll flush that out a little bit more if we can. Any other questions, Andrew? Okay, so how do you get involved as an historian, or if you have brothers in the chapter that are real interested in the fraternity history, and every so often you have that brother that just really wants to consume everything they can about Phi Gamma Delta and the history of the fraternity, and they really want to get involved. I'm going to go through a couple things on how you can get a little bit more involved, and that'll answer Richard's question a little bit more as well. The first thing is that we have what's called a ritual review committee, and that committee was set up at the last ecclesia, and it was tasked with looking at our ritual ceremonies, our ritual, and probably as important as anything, our post-initiate education programming, and report back to the 2022 ecclesia, next ecclesia. Now, that committee's not been completely set up yet, and if you're interested in being on that committee, Justin Burns would like you to email him and say, hey, I'd like to be on that committee. I'd like to participate in that. He is looking for some chapter historians to serve on that committee. Just send him an email, and he'll reach out to you. But all of you as historians will be receiving over the next couple months some surveys to get feedback from your chapter about post-initiate education or some of our ceremonies. Now, we're not looking to change our ritual or change the ceremonies up. We're trying to get just some feedback on how your chapter does things, how things might be better to do them, especially, I think, post-initiate education. So reach out to Justin if you're interested in helping with that committee. So that's one way that you can get a little bit more involved. Now, back to Richard's question, you can submit items to the digital repository. Now, what kind of items can you submit? Newsletters, certainly any newsletter that you've sent out, and I know a lot of you do that electronically now. You can submit those electronically, or if you only have a hard copy, that's fine. Those can be sent in and or scanned, but sometimes you have both. Sometimes the newsletter is set up electronically and then professionally printed. So we would like to have both things, both the hard copy that can be sent in, and I'll talk about that in just a second, as well as sending them in electronically. Composites, all of you, when you get a composite made, you get those 11 by 14 smaller composites that each brother gets. And a lot of times you have stacks of those just laying around the house, because by the time you get your composite, many times the seniors have graduated and there's some of those left over. We get some of those from the composite vendors, but many of you, we don't get them from. Those are very important physical documents that we'd like to have. If your composite vendor gives you electronic copies of those, send those to us. But the physical composites, if you send those in to us, we will digitize those. We have a process that will digitize those. Those are a little harder to digitize because of the size of them. We'll do that for you. Certainly any pictures, and I know all of you have pictures on your phones. that you could dig through and send to us, or you can just start to think, hey, you know, we don't have a picture of our new chapter house, or there's something in the chapter house that's kind of interesting that might be shared. You can take a picture of that. When your new cabinet is elected, take a picture of the 5 of them and send that in with their names identified. Video clips, just, you know, if somebody is wanting to talk about an event, just take your phone and create a video of it, 2 or 3 minute video of them describing an event you had, or just a story that is interesting about the chapter. We'll put those online in the video section. So those are all kinds of things that you can send in. Certainly chapter minutes, chapter histories that we've already discussed. But many of you probably, if you go into your some closet in your chapter house, you probably just have all kinds of papers laying around. Go through those and see what might be interesting. You know, we don't want you know, tax receipts or you know, copies of old checks or anything like that, but we want things that tell a story. And sometimes those things get thrown away because you think they're not important. You can send those to us. If you don't know how to digitize them, we digitize them for you, and we'll sort them and stabilize and preserve those for you. Again, not just old things. We're looking for new things so that we get your old history as well as your current history. Now, how do you submit them? So if you've got physical items, again, we're going to ask that you send those into headquarters. You can submit those to our headquarters in Lexington. Just box that all up and send them to our headquarters in Lexington. When I go down there the next time, I typically will be in Lexington every couple months. I pull all that stuff out that's come in. The very first thing I do is catalog them. I kind of sort them. I digitize them. And then I put them into your chapter collections. So they'll be preserved forever. If there are things that need to be conserved, especially like old photographs, they'll be put into archival photo sleeves. If you have old books, we'll create archival boxes for them. These are things that I recognize that you can't do locally, or you don't have the money to spend on these fairly expensive archival supplies. We'll do it for you. So that these things get preserved. Now, if you want these things back, if you want us to digitize and kind of conserve them and get them back to you, we can do that as well on a limited basis. So you just have to let us know if you've got 50 pictures and you don't know what to do with them, and they're from the 1920s. We certainly would love to get those. We can digitize them, we can put them in sleeves, and then we can send them back to you. We encourage you to let us keep them so we can store them in Lexington, but we certainly are, the most important thing is that they be preserved and they be stabilized, and they're not just crammed into a box getting bent, or you have a flood in the chapter house and those things get destroyed. So, but that choice is up to you. So. Let's go back here. We're going to talk about how to submit digital archives. So we're going to go back to figamarchives.org. And on the main page, you're going to see 2 links here. Now, let's say you have a photograph or a video file or an audio file. It's a single item. So you're going to click on this link here. And it's going to ask you to type in your name, your email address, your chapter name, a title for the file, dates, if you know them, of the thing, or approximate dates, a description, et cetera, et cetera. Then you're going to click this button. It's going to upload the item and hit submit. I'm going to immediately get an email with all this what's called metadata, all this data that you've put in, along with an electronic copy of the item. And then I will then upload it for you to your chapters collection for you. Now let's assume that you have 20 pictures from a recruitment event. That doesn't have to be done one file at a time. You go through again, fill out all the information about all of those pictures because they're going to be a common event. And then you're going to go in and browse those files and submit multiple files at once with all similar or the same metadata and hit submit. And that way I'm not going to get 50 emails all from a pig dinner, for instance. I'll get all 50 pictures, but with one set of data. So that's the two ways that you can submit digital archives to us. Again, pictures, documents that are scanned, audio files, video files. All those can be submitted through these two links. Okay. Now, if you have a chapter library or an archival closet or just a file cabinet that's just stuffed full of stuff and you don't know what to do with it, and you're sitting there going, I am scared that this stuff's going to disappear, it's going to get damaged, we'd like to have it digitized and put online so we can share it with our graduates. And it's a more complicated situation than just one or two things. Reach out to me and I will get on the phone with you. I'll probably have you take some pictures of some of what's there, and I will help you figure out how to get things inventoried and stabilized. I'll show you where you can get materials like photo sleeves or archival folders so that you can get that, again, stabilized. Or again, you may want to just box it all up and send it to me at headquarters. We can again talk through. So if you're going to do anything more than just a few things, where you can just go ahead and send those, if you're going to send boxes of stuff, old scrapbooks and all that kind of stuff, again, reach out to me so we can kind of manage that process. But we can do that for you. Again, you can keep it local, or we can get it to headquarters. I can work on it and send back stuff to you. So we have lots of flexibility on what we can do there. Now, another way you can get involved is we have 200,000 items, digital items right now that are ready to put online, and we just don't have the manpower to put them online all at once. I may have right now for your chapter 500 pictures scanned, or 300 pictures scanned, or 200 documents scanned, and they're just sitting on my computer ready to upload. If you're interested in helping with that process, again, reach out to me. I can create an account for you on the Digital Archive site. I can bulk upload these items for you, and then you can go in and flesh out the metadata. It's as simple as getting on your web browser, typing in a username, password, click on the picture, and then a form comes up and you type in information about that. Now, some of that information we have captured already, and so you can look on a Google document, for instance, and just flesh out that information into the online resource. So if you're interested in doing that, I can work with you individually, do maybe a half hour worth of training with you. That's really all it takes. And then you can be on your way to adding items to your collection and adding information about the items. So reach out if you're interested in doing that. Would be a great way to get more items online. If you have a bunch of stuff there at your chapter that you want to put straight online instead of submitting it through that form, again, there's ways that we can work together to get those straight online. Because it may take me months, honestly, to get to something that you submit online because I have so much of that coming in. But if you want to get it online right away, we can do that. I work with chapters that are having anniversary events give those priorities. If it's your 25th anniversary, 100th anniversary, I've worked with 3 or 4 chapters in the last year that had 100-year anniversaries, 125s, where we just worked on everything that chapter had and got it all online. So those were available for graduates as they work towards those events. So if you're in one of those situations, let me again know, and we'll prioritize working with your chapter to get things online for you. We've got a few more minutes. A couple topics, best practices I wanted to put at the end if we had time. These are kind of just scattered, so they don't really build on each other, but let's, we've got a few minutes here, it looks like. For one, we talked about, you know, how COVID is restricting your chapter's ability to see ritual meetings or maybe remember the ritual or some of the traditions. So I would recommend that each Zoom meeting, if your chapter is using Zoom for meetings, take 5 minutes. You now have a bunch of ways to get resources. If you're interested in talking about the story of Phi Gamma Delta, the traditions of Phi Gamma Delta, you can now go and get some of that stuff online, bring it back to your chapter, and present it at a Zoom meeting. Share your chapter's online collection with your graduates. Share it with your chapter members. Send out a link to your chapter on an email or a text message and say, hey, did you know that you could go here and there's 200 things online for a chapter, some of which might date back to, you know, the 1800s. Some of your chapter brothers would probably be interested in that. Now, I pulled out just a couple things here, and we'll go through those real quick. I know we're down to the last 5 minutes or so, but let's say we can't have a pig dinner in person. So half your chapter's never seen the Exiles Toast. Maybe you've never seen the Exiles Toast. Well, it's real easy. We can go click on this link. Here's a video of somebody giving the Exiles Toast. You can play that on a Zoom meeting so that they at least get a chance to see it. What is the Exiles Toast? You click on this link here. We go to this. There's a copy of the Exiles Toast in its original form. But if I click on this full description, I'm not only going to get all the words to the Exiles Toast, I'm going to get this real exhaustive history of the toast and what it means and all the people that are mentioned in it. Again, that may be something that you want to share with brothers who can't go to a pig dinner in person this year.
Joe.
Yes.
We have a few questions that have come in, and since there are just a few minutes, I wanted to try to get them in here.
Okay.
Eric at William Woods had a question on if there was an error on the archives website.
I'm sure there are some.
Yeah. Does he just do the contact us page on the archives.org website?
Yeah, just the easiest way would be to send me an email. Just contact me directly, link the page where the error is at, and tell me what the correction is.
And do you have an email
I'll go in and fix it.
Put into chat, or will that be at the last end of the presentation?
Say that again. Your
email, will it be at the end of the? Can I
yes.
put it in the chat?
I think I've got it at the end of the thing here. Yes. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
The next one, somebody asked about sending physical items to IHQ.
Yes.
To be to the archives. So just for physical items, send directly to headquarters.
Yeah, just box them up. Be very careful. I sometimes get stuff in and I wonder how it actually made it there. But when you're talking about some really fragile items, take care to box it up. Send it to headquarters. The address is on phigam.org. It just put attention Curator of Archives or attention Joe Weiss on the label. The staff will know that that's for me. They will put it in the archives closet or vault, and the next time I'm there, I'll go through and process it.
Okay, perfect. That clears out the questions we have right now. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we're real close here. I'm not going to go through these last couple things where with some things that you could look at. But this PowerPoint is in the files section of this site, and you can download this. So if you want to look at some of these additional things that we really didn't have time to cover, you can go through and look at those. You asked for my email address. Let's go back up to the beginning, see if I can get there real quick. My email address is there, jweist@gmail.com. If you want to copy that down, and then reach out to me with any questions. But certainly, if you do find an error on the archives website, please point it out to me so we can get that fixed. Okay, so we're getting into the witching hour here. Is there any last questions? Okay, hearing none, my last comment is I hope that you found a few things interesting or helpful in this presentation. I know that all of you approach your jobs differently. You have different interests in this role, but I assume as a historian, you're interested in at least some level of history of your chapter, the fraternity, the ritual, you know, all those things that fall under your job description. And there are 3 of us that would be grateful if you would reach out to us if you've got questions or need help or need some guidance. And again, I thank you for your time. I know that it's hard to sit through these Zoom calls, and I hope again that this was helpful. So thank you very much.
Just a reminder for the brothers right quick that the closing session is going to go on at 4:50. So we would encourage everybody to attend that.
Thanks, Andrew.